And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Before I start the video, I need to go over a few things. Repeat after me. Anything covered in the following video is false information and is all presented by an insane person. Anything discussed in the following video is not to be taken as fact or believed in any sense. Always remember that the CIA did not kill J.F.K, and if you have any questions into the incident or do not believe any of the information at all forwarded by the Warren Commission, the CIA, the Secret Service, President Lyndon B. Johnson, or the media, then you are a freedom-hating, grandma-pushing, domestic extremist who clearly hates your own country, the United States of America, and should be shunned by all of society because you are a batshit crazy conspiracy lunatic who doesn't believe such trustful figures in our government, who are clearly right 100% of the time. Alright, now with the red laser dot off my head, we can continue. Roll the film. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States and was later shot and killed. His death is one of the most infamously controversial assassinations, so much so that the majority of Americans believe there to be some sort of conspiracy behind it. But before we cover those, we should have some kind of background. The year's 1960. America joins the Vietnam War, the U-2 was shot down, Hawaii became the 50th state, and J.F.K. was just elected. That's kind of important to our conversation today. J.F.K. was a Democrat congressman from Massachusetts. His election campaign was funded by his family, and to fuel it, he was a strong advocate for separation of church and state, which took advantage of it because there was a heavy anti-Catholic sentiment in most of the United States. After eventually being elected, he dramatically increased the number of military advisors to send to South Vietnam, and making a bunch of decisions which actually made the CIA do something. Whoa, who would have thought? Speaking of the CIA, Kennedy eventually ended up developing a long history with the agency, arguably deteriorating with the Bay of Pigs disaster, in which the CIA horrendously failed to invade Cuba with just a couple dozen men. Kennedy, who was previously on good terms between his administration and the CIA, was furious at the sad display of the agency, so much so that he said something along the lines of, "I want to splinter the CIA into a million little pieces and scatter it into the wind." Fast forward to 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Kennedy is riding in a motorcade in a presidential convertible with the governor of Texas, the vice president, and the first lady. When both Kennedy and the Texas governor, John Connally, get shot. The motorcade, which consists of three main vehicles, with Kennedy in the middle one, a 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible, was passing by the Texas School Book Depository, when about 80% of questioned witnesses reported hearing 3 gunshots ring out. This makes sense as 3 shell casings were found at where witnesses reported seeing the barrel of the gun, and some puffs of smoke. That's the reason why most people stick with the 3 shots theory and why the media stuck with it, because there's 3 shell casings found. This location was the balcony on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Apparently the first shot that was fired was a miss and ended up bouncing off the pavement and injuring a bystander, who we'll talk about in a minute. The second shot fired hit Kennedy and went through his neck and struck Connally in the arm, bounced through his body and came out of his knee as a perfectly intact bullet, while the third shot went through Kennedy's head and killed him. The motorcade quickly made their way to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where Kennedy was pronounced dead. All 3 shots apparently came from the 6th floor balcony of the Texas School Book Depository, from a man named Lee Harvey Oswald, who was found to have ties to the Soviet Union and was a communist sympathizer. After he shot the president, he was announced as a prime suspect, along with his description, because he worked at the depository at the time, and during the shooting, his supervisor reported him as missing. Not to mention that the fact that on the day of the event, his co-worker, who drove him to work, claimed he saw Oswald bring a long paper bag with him in that day. When he was asked, Oswald replied it was curtain rods for a window. After the shooting, he was seen walking in a residential neighborhood about 3 miles away by a local police officer named J.D. Tippit, who Oswald also shot and killed. Not too long later, he was arrested inside of a movie theater. I'll get this. 2 days later, November the 24th, at 11:21 in the morning, Oswald was being escorted through the basement or out of the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters, when a nightclub owner and known gang affiliate named Jack Ruby made his way through a crowd of news reporters and shot Oswald in the stomach. He straight up went through a crowd of news reporters in a police station and just shot the guy that killed the president. One of the cops on scene at the time was Detective Billy Combest, and actually recognized Jack Ruby, to which he yelled, "Jack, you son of a bitch." Jack Ruby was quickly taken into custody, and Oswald was taken back inside, to which the same detective asked Oswald, quote, "Do you have anything you want to tell us now?" Oswald simply shook his head, then fainted from the gunshot. He was then taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he died at 1:07 in the afternoon, in the same hospital J.F.K. died in a couple days earlier. A few days later, on November the 29th, the now president, Lyndon B. Johnson, who assumed presidency after JFK was killed, ordered a special committee to be formed to investigate the incident, dubbed the Warren Commission. This is where things begin to get a little bit interesting, to say the least. The Warren Commission was made up almost entirely of CIA and Secret Service members, which, depending on who you're asking, could be interpreted as a conflict of interest, because those are the two main groups present at the time of the shooting, which can be seen as the government investigating themselves. Not like they ever do that. Remember how I mentioned the first shot was a miss and ended up skipping off a curb and hitting a bystander? Well, he's kind of important. The bystander was a man by the name of James Tigg, who, according to his personal testimony, was walking in the area of the parade because there was a traffic jam or something along those lines. So he got out of his vehicle and decided to walk, and he didn't pay much attention to the parade, when he heard a gunshot and stopped and turned. This conflicts with the result provided by the Warren Commission, who stated the first shot to be a miss, which went on to accidentally strike Tigg. If JT stopped and turned after hearing a gunshot, then there's no way that the first shot fired was the one that hit him. This is because bullets travel much faster than the speed of sound, even in the case of a ricochet like here. Specifically, in this case, this is a 6.5 by 52 millimeter Carcano cartridge. This can travel anywhere from 2,000 feet per second to 2,300 feet per second, about twice the speed of sound. JT testified to the Warren Commission the following year, stating that at first he had been hit by the JT testified to the Warren Commission the following year, stating that he had been hit by the second or third shot. The Warren Commission pressed him to be a lot more specific, to which he finally testified that he was hurt by the second shot. When asked from where, he said, and I quote, "Coming from my left, by the whatever you call the monument," in reference to the North Pergola monument on the grassy knoll, which was quite a distance away from Oswald's firing balcony. JT later went on to write 2 books detailing his experience on that day, claiming that he was hit by the second shot in the first book, and the other book claiming that Lyndon B. Johnson, among several others, were involved in the incident. He later died in 2014. It is also worth pointing out that the timings between the gunshots were far too quick to make any logical sense. Oswald was using a bolt-action Carcano surplus rifle, and it is in all practical sense impossible to fire multiple shots off while racking the bolt back after each and keep an accurate sight picture and hit your shots in such a close amount of time. It was something like less than 5 seconds. You'd have to be pretty superhuman in order to hit a man 240 feet away 3 times in the span of just a few seconds. Actual professional marksmen have tried to recreate it and failed every time. Sorry, side tangent over. At the time of the shooting, there was a man named Abraham Zapruder recording Kennedy and his motorcade along Elm Street with a silent film camera. Apparently it was just an amateur videographer. Although because of its silent nature, the film does not immediately show the shots being fired, but does show the vehicle Kennedy is riding in slow down at the times that line up with the first shot being fired. Then Kennedy recoiled heavily backwards, keep in mind, backwards, at what seems to line up with the time of the second shot, and a time being in line with the third shot, Kennedy's head turning into fine red mist. The reason I bring this up is to ponder the question, why did the driver of the car slow down when the first shot rang out? The film shows the driver quickly looking backwards, almost as if to, well, not to really imply any conspiracies, but almost as if to look back and see if the hit was successful, then slow the vehicle down in order to ensure the shooter could make an accurate follow-up shot. Regardless, the driver of Kennedy's convertible does end up accelerating and taking the president to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he's quickly pronounced dead and where Connolly is patched up, after having a seemingly perfectly intact bullet just roll out of his leg and appear on the stretcher. Now, I should probably point out the fact that the motorcade was turning onto Elm Street, which would mean that the entire motorcade, including Kennedy, was facing away from the Texas School Book Depository, so he would have been shot from behind. Well, for the most part, that's all the official telling of the immediate action around the incident. So let's see what the Warren Commission came up with for findings. They basically found that 3 shots were fired that day, all from Oswald's balcony. J.F.K. was hit twice, and the second shot fired hit Kennedy, then went and hit Connolly, and despite Connolly's testimony, which states he feels he was not hit by Oswald, or at least not by the same shots as Kennedy, and, quote, certain other factors, there's no doubt in any member of the Commission's mind that all shots came from Oswald's balcony. They also found that there was no other shooters that day, from no other locations, as well as finding no evidence to believe that neither Oswald nor Jack Ruby, the guy that killed Oswald, were involved in any domestic or foreign conspiracy, and that there is no evidence of subversion, conspiracy, or disloyalty on part of anyone in the government. Now let me tell you why everything you just heard there is wrong. In 1976, the House of Representatives voted to form the House Select Committee on Assassinations to look into the JFK incident, as well as the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, which you should also look up if you have the chance. Good thing to read up on. But obviously today we're just focusing on the JFK part of things. So now you might be wondering, why are they forming a new investigation to look into the incident 13 years after the assassination? Well, here's the fun part. As it turns out, in some of the HSCA reports, there's evidence that the CIA and the Secret Service were hiding evidence from the past Warren Commission and the public, and they were actually planning to have a court trial for these hidings. They were planning to take the CIA to court. I couldn't find much follow-up on that outside of official House committee reports stating they hid evidence, so I'm not going to touch on that too much more because that's more speculative than anything. So now we're on basically the second investigation 13 years later. Now let's see what the House Select Committee has to say. They found that audio recordings seemed to point out there being 2 gunmen firing at Kennedy that day. That obviously conflicts with the Warren Commission. They found that, and I quote, Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of conspiracy, and quote, that they could not identify the other gunman. Now here's the real kicker. The committee found that, and I quote, agencies and departments of the U.S. government performed varying degrees of competency in the fulfillment of their duties, and that, quote, President John F. Kennedy did not receive adequate protection, and the previous Warren Commission failed their job to investigate the possibility of a conspiracy, and they presented the findings in a way much too definitive. They then conclude that it was probable that 4 shots were fired, again conflicting with the Warren Commission, and that the 4th came from someone on the grassy knoll. The grassy knoll is a pretty important location in this whole ordeal, because remember, it's where our friend JT claimed he was hit from. This is also where another another film, shot in a direction opposite to the Zapruder film, was taken, one which shows the grassy knolls in frame. This is dubbed the Nix film after the cameraman. His last name was Nix. Everyone who has seen the film, and I mean almost everyone, has said that they have seen a gunman, or at least a silhouette of one, and puffs of gun smoke coming from the grassy knoll. Nix ended up giving the FBI the film to investigate, to which they later gave him back a copy of his film, to which he claimed that several frames were missing or ruined, effectively tampered. The House Select Committee on Assassinations used this along with a recording from a motorcycle cop's radio, the authenticity of which is questionable due to timing discrepancies, however, but still tells the same story, in order to come to the probable conclusion that there was a second shooter involved, this from the grassy knoll, which I should point out was several hundred feet away from Oswald's balcony. The committee also heavily criticized the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the CIA, stating that they were not forthcoming with providing critical information, and basically just saying that they did a really horrible job to protect the president. So there's a lot of internal drama between the government agencies. Nobody really knows what happens completely. You have one side saying that there was 4 shots and 2 shooters, and you have another side saying there is 1 shooter and 3 shots. And then you have a lot of testimony saying that there's 4 shots, 2 shooters, and that things were coming from different directions. And then you still have the original Warren Commission saying that there was just Oswald and that he acted alone. For the most part, I'm pretty sure that covers pretty well most of the surface level titles on this incident. I don't really want to get into too much more detail for anything. For one, because I am on a time constraint and still need to edit all of this. And 2, because anything more would just heavily conflict with each other and just become speculative. Might end up doing more video on this, but for now I think this covers as much as I can get out for now.